Welcome back to this series of great recordings. Now, every month, one of the biggest challenges I face is trying to decide which piece of music I want to talk about. Well, this month it was quite straightforward because the Pearl Acoustics team have decided to go to Exponer in Chicago in the US with the loudspeakers and with their amplifiers and stuff to show off what they have there, of course. Now, they invited me to join them, and I decided I definitely want to go. Although I am a reluctant long-haul flyer, I thought, yes, this is a chance of a lifetime and a chance to meet many people as well. So I've said yes. And this kind of inspired me to think about the piece of music today, which of course is Antonin Dvorak's Symphony from the New World. But just to say, I will also go to the Montreal show a week or so before. We'll put the dates in the video. So if you're going to be there, I have a chance to meet you there, and obviously in Chicago as well. Well, back to the topic of today. So I've decided on Antonin Dvorak's Symphony from the New World, and as always, if you go into the description below, you will find a table of contents, and you can just click to the piece you want. So if the next bit I want to talk about, which is about Antonin Dvorak's life, you can just skip that if you're not interested in that, or you know everything there is to know about the great composer already. Okay, but just a little bit of content or context. Who is Antonin Dvorak? Antonin Dvorak was born in 1841 on the 8th of September in a town near Prague in the Austrian Empire. His father was a butcher by trade and also an innkeeper, but he also played the zither professionally as well. So music was obviously in the family. Antonin, if I remember, was the oldest of the sons of the, if not all the family, but there were 14 children. They had Antonin's father and his mother, 14 children. His mother was the daughter of a bailiff, so I have a feeling that there was a little bit of money around in the household. Probably not super rich, but comfortable. Antonin Dvorak started playing the violin at the age of 6, and at the age of 13, his father basically sent him away to go and study with his uncle to improve his German, and also to learn organ and composition and music theory. So that all happened by the age of 13. And let me just get my notes to remind me exactly what date it was. Yes, 1857, age 16. Antonin left for Prague, to study the organ there. And from 1858 to 64, he played with a kind of bohemian orchestra, but it seems it was a very high standard indeed. Because even Wagner apparently conducted it once whilst he was there. And Dvorak at that time was a great admirer of Wagner. Now, in 1864, he shared a house with a number of other musicians, like our young musicians from Young Belgian Talent do today. Our classical musicians often, shack up and share the rent of an apartment or a house to keep their costs as low as possible and to have fun and play together, I'm sure. But whilst he was doing that, in that period of his life, he started to teach piano in order to earn a bit of extra cash. Indeed, very much like a lot of the young musicians that I work with today. And in doing so, of course, he fell in love with one of his pupils, madly in love, it seems, with one of his pupils, but she didn't return that love. Antonin did not do what it took to move her, but he ended up marrying her younger sister. Now, that was at the age of 32, and they had 9 children together, but that's for later on. So in 1874, he had a bit of a breakthrough because he won the Austrian State Prize for composers in need, young composers in need. And that really helped him get established because in the jury, amongst other notable musicians at the time, there was a Johannes Brahms. And Johannes Brahms saw a lot in Dvorak. In fact, Dvorak entered the competitions 3 times with Brahms in the jury. And it really showed how much he really was striving to get recognition as a composer and to become a successful professional musician, and not just an organist that his father's kind of eyes were set on originally. Okay, so in 1877-78, success came to him because an international publisher, Brahms's publisher, I think probably with the influence of Brahms, decided to publish some of his work, the Slavonic Dances, and others, and that really started to bring him fame and notoriety. He even travelled to London 8 times in his career. In 1884, certainly had a lot of success in London. And then 1890, he went and visited Russia. He was very much inspired by Tchaikovsky at the time. But this is the important bit. In 1892, 1895, Janet Thurber, living in America, was setting up, or had set up, a conservatoire, a new music conservatoire in New York. And she really wanted this conservatoire to establish American music with its own genre, not just being something based upon or mimicking European music. And so she noticed in Antonin Dvorak that he was picking up lots of elements of folk music, folk melodies, folk rhythms, and from his Bohemian background, and I mean that Bohemian in the sense that's where he came from, Bohemia, and that he was inspired. Nationalistic is a big word, but he was definitely expressing the landscape and the culture of where he lived. And this attracted him to her. And she actually offered him a salary which would be equivalent to $500,000 a year in today's money, which was massive money. So this was a no-brainer for Antonin Dvorak. And he, like me, was a reluctant traveller of long distance. He loved his homeland. I like being here in my listening room and settled in Belgium. So it takes a hell of a lot to get me onto an aeroplane these days. But he travelled out there with his wife and 1 or 2 of the children at that time. And he ended up staying there, I think, for about 3 years. And whilst he was there, he composed his marvellous, marvellous cello concerto, which we will come back to in a later edition of this series. But he also, of course, composed the work that we are going to talk about and share with you, the Symphony from the New World. And this was commissioned by the New York Philharmonic, and well, the rest is history. Now, Antonin Dvorak died in the 1st of May 1904 at the age of 62 back in Prague. And so now, how can I lead you onto the music itself? Well, because this symphony, I think everybody knows it. Certainly everybody on the planet almost will recognize the theme of the second movement. It's in 4 movements, very traditional in that respect. I think it's quite important to remember here too. So Dvorak was born basically 14 years after Beethoven had died. Beethoven died in 1827. So Beethoven would have been very, very much around and played and influential at this period when Dvorak was growing up. So you can't ignore the massive impact that Beethoven had across the classical music world at that time. Although Brahms was in the hot seat, and he was the new big giant in the music industry, if you like. So the structure of this symphony is quite Beethoven, and if you look back a little bit, you see, so we begin with an Adagio and then straight into an Allegro molto, which we will come to, which means fast, very fast, a slow beginning, then a very fast beginning. And then there's the Largo, the famous Largo, the slow second movement. And then they had a Scherzo, so very much like Beethoven's structure, say Symphony No. 3, a Scherzo, and then a finale. So nothing really extraordinary or modern or fantastic about that, but we will come on. So now I've selected 6 recordings today, Paavo Järvi with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, Rudolf Kemp with the Berlin Philharmonic, Leonard Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic. I had to have a New York Philharmonic somewhere in the six, so who better than Leonard Bernstein? Then I have a Riccardo Muti from the New Philharmonia Orchestra, and then I have Yirif Belholavek. It's a difficult word for me to pronounce, and I'm probably doing it totally wrong. Everybody will jump at me to correct me on that one. So of the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra. And I think it's important to see what the Czech kind of culture, how that's portrayed today, because that recording was made in 1990. And then lastly, Gustavo Dudamel with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Now, I will give you all the dates and everything else, but it's more or less in date order that I've discussed these. Okay, perfect. So that is our symphony as such. Let's get started, shall we? Now, in the first movement, I'm going to open with Paavo Järvi's version with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, this is a very, very interesting recording. It's very hard to find. It's everywhere on the streaming services, but you'll see lots of different covers and labels. And I have seen in Discogs that there is a kind of audio file version. I haven't managed to get my hands on it yet. I want to try and get hold of the CD of it because, as you'll find out later, it's a very dynamic recording. So I'm going to warn you to get in your hot seats. We've got a very quiet opening, and then we're going to crash into the beginning of Antonin Dvorak's Symphony from the New World, Opus 95. What a marvellous opening to a symphony. And Järvi's dramatic positioning. Now, you'll notice that the horns will be on the left and the timpani will be in the middle. Well, as you we'll go through the different versions, you'll hear that the conductors position the orchestras quite differently. Sometimes the horns will be on the right, sometimes the timpani will be on the right. And this is a great recording, but I just feel that there is a version of this recording which will be even better. There's a little bit of something happening when those horns are playing, and I don't think it was in the recording process. I think we're listening to a copy of a copy. If I find the definitive one, I'll definitely put it in the description, but it's still brilliant. Okay, let's move on to, of course, Leonard Bernstein, the New York Philharmonic. This is recorded in 1962. Now, the previous one, Järvi's, was recorded in 1994. So the 1962, the quality of the recording might not be as much, but it's really interesting to see how Bernstein, who was always had very much his own way of doing things, see how he handles exactly the same piece. Now, it's amazing how different two conductors can take it, but we haven't heard them all yet. I think this is a live recording. There seems to be quite a lot of sort of little noise in the background. I think it's fabulous. So now we're going to go to Belo Lavek with the Czech Philharmonic, 1990. Him opening the symphony. Let's see how he handles this. This is a conductor who's not in a hurry. He's not dragging it out, but it's a feeling of real control, very high quality playing here. But what is also very interesting is the dynamics here. The timpani, boom, they're very far back, aren't they? It's a bit like sitting halfway down the hall and the timpani are right at the back. He's not letting them smash into your face like we've heard with some of the other recordings. So it's much more kind of balanced in that respect. Now we're going to go to Dudamel with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. This is a very recent recording, released in 2022. Listen to how that clarinet, early clarinet entry is a little bit more subdued, and I'm going to let this run in to get a feel of the first movement. Okay, so let's just give this a whirl. I think Dudamel has a very nice control here, and it's a very, very balanced introduction. Now, I want to play to the end of the first movement, pick up later on towards the end, and for that I'm going to pick up on Paavo Järvi with the Royal Philharmonic, because again, this dynamic range, he's really using everything that's got in the recording. And I've checked it. I'm picking up at least 50 decibels. Now, YouTube are going to compress this a lot, so you'll have to dig out your own copies and get them on CD or whatever, or stream. But sometimes I do think for classical music, if you can get hold of the original CDs, sometimes you do get a bigger dynamic range. Maybe it's just me. But anyway, so it's really impressive because, and I'll show you here, the same part towards we're going to play in a minute. I've got two sections here. At the top I've got Järvi, and an identical part of the music towards the end I've got the Belolavec with the Czech orchestra. And look at the waveforms. Look how big and dynamic, how Järvi is filling the whole space, and the contrast between the full and small compared to Belolavec. You see that that's much more even. There's nothing really woof and dramatic. Now, it can be partly to do with the recording and compression that's added later on. I do believe it is also a decision not to exaggerate crescendos. If I was driving in my car, I think the Belolavec with the Czech would be more comfortable because I wouldn't have to constantly turn the volume up and down. But of course, sitting in my lovely listening room here, it's more or less soundproofed, I can play as loud as I like, not disturb anyone, then obviously the Järvi is not an issue at all. Let's just, excuse me, play out of the first movement, to the end of the first movement, with Paavo Järvi. Wow. I turned the volume down here because I was worried we were going to overload the recording in the room, and the mics in the room. Now, obviously, what you're hearing with these in-room microphones is nothing compared to what it would be if you were sitting here with me, and maybe one day you will join me. We'll have a chance to do that together. But yeah, what a fantastic thing. Wow, that's the end of the first movement. But some say the best is still to come. But of course, for me, there is no best. The whole point of a symphony is that it's a journey from the beginning right the way through the four movements in this case. And now we're into the Largo, the second movement. And I want to start with Belolavec, with the Czech Philharmonic. Again, apologies if I'm pronouncing this name hopelessly wrong. I'm sure I am. But it's such a beautiful piece. Everybody knows it. Everybody recognizes. Let's just get started. Isn't that lovely? It's played, the melody is played by the cor anglais. That's the name I was taught when I was growing up in England, which actually translates to horn English or English horn. It's very much like an oboe, but it's a little bit bigger. And I once had the opportunity of hearing a student orchestra, but very high standard student orchestra, conducted by Maestro Michel Tilkin. And one of the not-for-profit organisation where we have supporting young classical musicians, Baldo Dandeville, played that. And I think he must have been about 16 at the time. And it's this moment, you know, after that fantastic first movement, and this melody comes in. And Baldo, I hope he won't mind me saying, he's not the tallest man in the world. And he's playing this, and all eyes are on him. And it's so easy to make a mistake. And he played it so beautifully. It's a memory that will stick with me forever. And I really do recommend it. If you get a chance to hear this performed live, go, because it's such an amazing piece to hear live. And in fact, Dvorak here, he writes for every instrument. I can imagine if a conductor says to the orchestra, no matter who it is or where it is in the world, we're going to do Symphony from the New World, I think every musician's going to go, yes, great. Because they've all got something very important to do. The solos for the flutes, the clarinets. I mean, really, it's a marvelous. If Dvorak was trying to show his pupils in New York what a symphony is and what you need to compose, well, my goodness, you couldn't set a better example. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Let's move on to track 7. And Leonard Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic. Let's listen to see how his opening is, and listen to the crescendos especially. Okay. Very, very different. One of the things that Baldo Dandeville told me once is that I said to him, well, why don't you go, when you've left the conservatoire, why wouldn't you go to America and play there for a few years, or why Germany, for example? And he told me that in Germany and in parts of Europe, not quite, France is slightly different again, they have a different sound. They want a different sound from oboe and also from the cor anglais. So it's a sort of a warmer, fuller, different sound anyway. And compared to America, and he would have to adjust his whole technique and even maybe his instrument. And you can hear a difference between the Belalovec and Czech film sound of the cor anglais and that in this recording. And it isn't just the mixing and the recording, it's actually a different kind of playing. I just throw that in there because I thought maybe you might find that interesting. Now what I want to do is just focus on the opening bars, just because I think it's really interesting. It's damn difficult for a start, because you've got to get the horns and all to come in exactly together. Listen to how Rudolf Kemp with the Berlin Philharmonic play this. The intonation isn't fantastic, is it? And it's a Berlin Philharmonic. Okay, it's 1958, so it's a lot earlier, but it just goes to show also that the standard of performing today, I think, as musicianship is probably higher than it was in the past. And I'm going to get shot for that, for saying that. But I think it's a bit like the Olympics. Every year, the 100 meters is getting, you know, quicker. Did they have less rehearsal time? I don't know. But if I just take you back to to Bernstein's opening, just listen to the very first notes of the horns with Bernstein. Listen. Did you hear that? It's not exactly together, is it? Listen. If I take you to the beginning of Belalovec's and the Czech, listen. You see what I mean? That's a massive difference. And it's really, 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 really difficult to pull off. And let's see how Riccardo Muti with the New Philharmonia, and listen to the phrasing here, listen to the bars here. It's very, very different. Fascinating. I find it fascinating anyway. And it's a bit like talking about hi-fi, because if I say, oh, the treble is this and the mid is this and this wonderful int 25 from Pass Labs, I mean, all of this stuff, you could say that detracts from the music. And some will say the way I zoom in and I notice whether the horns are coming in exactly together, and whether they can hold the note for a long time, or the intonation drops. I mean, for me, I find that fascinating, because obviously I am, in my roots, in my bones, a musician, even though I never earned my living from it, thank goodness for everybody else. But it doesn't distract from me, because I can switch off from that and just get involved and enveloped into the music. I promise you I can. Now, so now I'm going to go to Muti again. We're going to stay with Muti, but we're going to be further into the second movement. Have a listen to Muti. Now this lovely 4/4 common time, the pizzicato in the bass is so beautiful, and it's very subtle here. Now I want to take you back to Bernstein to play you that same fragment. See where we are here. Okay, for a start, we've got a tempo difference, haven't we? But did you feel that the whole balance tonally is completely different? You could think, is this the same piece of music? The two are very, very different. And you need to decide which one you particularly like. Now, let's go back to Dudamel and have a listen to see how he handles it with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. You know what? Sometimes when I'm listening to jazz, with like a jazz trio, jazz ensemble, you've got the acoustic bass. Some bass players, Ray Brown, for example, he pushes the tempo along. He's the whole ensemble is moving around the bass line, where others are just going boom, 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 and it's just a totally integral part. And the difference is just timing. Where exactly is that beat falling? And great conductors, and all of these conductors I've chosen today are really great conductors and great orchestras. They can choose and they can decide exactly how they're going to do this. Slightly in front, slightly behind, bang on, everybody following on that. And that's what makes it so interesting. And you see the differences in the different performances that I'm sharing with you today. Well, I hope you're appreciating or enjoying this, I should say. Well, let's stick with Dudamel. And because that Dudamel tempo is rather strange at first, but when you hear the whole performance, it makes sense. And you get used to that faster tempo, especially if you're not aware of the slower ones like from Bernstein or whatever. But anyway, let's get Dudamel to take us with the Los Angeles Philharmonic to this very sublime ending to the second movement. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Now that brings us on to the third movement, and they often run straight into one another. Okay, let's go with the third movement. Now, the third movement, our Scherzo. I'm going to open with Belo Lavek, Belo Lavek, my goodness me, in the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra. Let's see how he opens the third movement. Well, we'll leave it there because I want to compare this with how our friend Järvi with the Royal Philharmonic is going to take it. Now, remember, Järvi version is a very, very much the dynamic one. Let's see how he takes this. Okay, that's very different, I think you'll agree, but this is something I think is really interesting to hear what happens with when we give the conductor's baton to Leonard Bernstein and say, right, open the third movement for us. Let's see what he comes up with. fascinating stuff. I hope it's just so different between the Belo-Lavec and the Bernstein. It's just miles apart, and you need to decide which one you find the most enjoyable and most interesting. Now, I want to switch to, I just wanted to say something about the clarinets. In the opening of those sequences, you'll hear the clarinets, and the clarinets are really dictating the rhythm. And it's very, very interesting to see how basically Jarvi and Bernstein really used them there. And everything sort of hangs, like I was saying, around the bass playing, the double bass playing in a jazz band. Excuse me. It's interesting when you see that with the clarinets here, how they hang on to that rhythm and then determine that rhythm. You can imagine the communication between the conductor and the clarinet players there. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Gustav Dudamel and the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and we're further into the third movement now. Let's just pick it up here. I like the balance there. Everything is clear. Everything is making sense. The Bernstein is fun, especially for a live performance. He's throwing everything at you. But here, Dudamel he's reading the score. He's picking out everything and giving everything balance. And actually, I like that. You know, when I'm listening at home and listening to a recording, it's very different from going to the concert hall. When you go to the concert hall, I'm always looking for something exciting and different and wow, and to fill the audience, because the person next to you is shuffling in their feet, or someone like me getting their handkerchief out and blowing their nose or whatever. So you really want the conductor to entertain, to be honest, and for the orchestra to have fun. Doesn't mean it can't be serious, doesn't mean it can't have all the emotions in the world. But sometimes I do like that control. Now, I just want to invite Riccardo Muti back onto the podium, our virtual podium, and ask him to take us to the end of the third movement. And let's see how he handles this balance that we want of fire and life and passion. I don't know. Let's find out what he wants to do with it. It's so easy to forget that last chord. You think it goes da ba ba bum, da 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 bum. Sorry, and you think, oh, he's going to get there, and then suddenly, oh yeah, there's a boom. When I'm in an audience, and I always seem to forget that one comes. I always think it's just going to fade out on that top note. You can see I never made it as a singer. Anyway, let's go to the closure of the symphony, the fourth movement. And let's invite Riccardo Muti. Let's keep him on our virtual podium and open the fourth movement for us. Okay, off we go. There we go, charging off, not to oblivion, but to a glorious end. But that's still to come, because I want to show you or demonstrate to you Jarvis with the Royal Philharmonic opening. I mean, you know, my dynamic guy here. Let's see how he handles this. It's very majestic. It's really, I love it. I mean, just when you hear that version, the whole timing, the rhythm, for me anyway, everything makes total sense. That to me sounds right. Now I want to move on a little bit now to our friend Belo Lavek, because I want him to pick up further in the fourth movement, because I want to show you how I feel. Somehow, maybe it's my fantasy, but I get the feeling that here he's really bringing a kind of Czech sound, a kind of a sound that I associate with sort of Eastern music, European music, sort of like that sort of Russian school, shall we say, Czechoslovakian music. And it's incredible how you can do this just by conducting an orchestra. really get the feeling that Antonin Dvorak is really on his home territory here. This is the Czech coming out in him. And I like the way that Bela Lovac, he brings that in. In the beginning of that sequence, you think, okay, what's Harley going on about? But then you get into that last sequence and you think, yeah, maybe, yeah, I can get that. Anyway, we're getting to the end of this wonderful piece of music. And I have chosen Gustavo Dudamel with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, recorded in 2022 on Deutsche Grammophon label. I've chosen him to close this. I think of the 6, if I had to make a choice, it wouldn't be the Kemp. I think there's too many errors. I think obviously the sound recording of 58, it's not brilliant, but that's not really the reason. It just doesn't seem full and complete to me. And imagine being Gustavo Dudamel, and I don't know how it came about that he came to record this. Maybe Deutsche Grammophon came to him and said, look, we haven't had a recording for a while, do you want to do it? I don't know, maybe Los Angeles Phil said, yes, we want to do it. Someone will know and they'll tell me. But if you think of it, he's standing there in front of the orchestra, the recording devices are all on, there's microphones everywhere, and he's thinking, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to record this? Do I go different like Bernstein? Do I play it how I think it should be, straight down the middle? And you know what? I think he gets it absolutely right. The balance is good, the discipline is there. It has such control and dignity from the orchestra. Just listen to the last notes and decide for yourself if that could ever be done any better. I think this is the definitive recording. I would like the Yavi, the Royal Phil, because I think it's exciting, as I say, and I'd like to dig out a better quality of a pressing or a CD if I can get one. But this Dudamel, if I could only have one on my desert island, this would be it for me. Well, you have been. Thank you for watching and sharing this with me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed the music and sharing it with you. And until the next time and the next video, enjoy the music at home, and I'll be back soon with another great recording. Enjoy the music.